Maria was a quiet woman who worked as a maid in one of the most beautiful mansions in the city. The mansion belonged to Maestro Lorenzo de Luca, a world-famous pianist known for his talent, pride, and strict discipline. People from all over Europe came to see him perform, and his concerts were always full of applause and admiration. But behind all the glamour and fame, Lorenzo was a man who didn't believe talent could exist anywhere outside of wealth and education. He thought greatness came only from those who had the privilege to learn it. Maria, on the other hand, lived a life completely opposite to his. She earned just enough to feed herself and her daughter Elena, a bright-eyed 10-year-old girl with soft curls and an endless curiosity for music. Maria's husband had passed away when Elena was very young, and since then, Maria had done everything she could to raise her daughter with love, honesty, and hope. Every day, Maria would wake up before sunrise, prepare a small breakfast for Elena, and then head to the mansion where she cleaned floors, polished furniture, and washed dishes. Elena often came with her mother after school because Maria couldn't afford to leave her alone at home. While Maria worked, Elena would sit quietly in a corner with her worn-out notebook, drawing pictures or reading. But what truly fascinated her wasn't the grand paintings or the glittering chandeliers. It was the piano. A massive grand piano stood in the center of the living room like a king on his throne. Its polished black surface reflected light like glass, and every time Maestro Lorenzo's fingers danced across the keys, the house came alive. The melodies floated through the air like a gentle wind, wrapping around every corner, filling Elena's small heart with wonder. She would stop everything just to listen, her eyes wide, her lips parted slightly, as if she was breathing in the music itself. When the maestro practiced, no one dared to enter the room. He hated distractions. Even the servants walked quietly past the doors, afraid of his temper. But Elena wasn't afraid. She didn't see him as a scary man. To her, he was a magician, and the piano was his wand. Every time he played, it felt like he was creating a world where words weren't needed, only sound. Sometimes, when the maestro left for his evening walks, Elena would sneak closer to the piano. Her small fingers would hover above the keys, too nervous to touch them. She was scared her mother would scold her or the maestro would find out. But curiosity was stronger than fear. One evening, when she thought no one was watching, she pressed one single key. The soft note rang out, clear, sweet, and gentle. Her heart jumped with excitement. She pressed another one, then another, forming a small tune that she remembered from hearing Lorenzo play. Her hands moved slowly, uncertainly, but there was something magical about it. Though she had never learned music, her fingers seemed to know where to go. That was the first time Elena touched the piano, and from that day, she couldn't stop thinking about it. When Maria noticed her daughter staring at the piano so often, she gently warned her, "Elena, we are not like them. The piano is not for us. It's very expensive, and Maestro wouldn't like anyone touching it." But Elena just smiled. "Mama, music doesn't care who plays it." Maria didn't know what to say. Those simple words touched her deeply. Her daughter was right. Maybe music really didn't belong only to the rich or the educated. Maybe it was something bigger, something that lived inside every person who could feel it. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, Elena would sit quietly near the piano room, humming the melodies she remembered from the maestro's practices. She would close her eyes and imagine herself playing on a big stage, her mother sitting proudly in the front row. Sometimes, the night guard, an old man named Roberto, would hear her soft humming. One night, he smiled and whispered, "You've got a gift, little one. Don't ever stop singing." Elena smiled shyly. "I'm not singing, sir. I'm playing in my head." As days passed, her connection to the piano grew stronger. It was like the music spoke to her in a language only she could understand. She didn't know about notes or scales or techniques. All she knew was that when she imagined those keys under her fingers, she felt alive. The maestro, meanwhile, remained unaware of the little girl's secret fascination. To him, Maria and Elena were just part of the background, like the walls or the floors that kept his house running smoothly. He didn't know that, in his own home, a small spark of raw, natural talent was waiting to shine. Elena didn't want fame or wealth. She didn't even dream of becoming famous like Lorenzo. All she wanted was to play, to let her heart speak through the notes. But deep inside, she knew one day she would have to face the maestro, the man who ruled the piano world, the man who believed that talent came only from privilege. And when that day came, he would finally learn that true music doesn't come from money, lessons, or fame. It comes from the soul of those who dare to feel it. Elena didn't know it yet, but her innocent love for the piano was about to change not only her life, but also the heart of the maestro himself. Every night after the mansion went quiet, and the last of the lights were turned off, Maria would softly whisper to her daughter, "Elena, time to sleep." But Elena's eyes always stayed open, glowing with the memory of the piano. That grand, shining instrument wasn't just a piece of furniture to her. It was a dream she couldn't stop thinking about. During the day, while her mother scrubbed the floors and dusted the shelves, Elena often sat near the corner of the music hall, pretending to read or draw. But in truth, her mind was filled with the tunes she had heard Maestro Lorenzo play. She could remember the sound of every note, the rise and fall of the melody, the emotion in it, as if the music had carved itself into her heart. Sometimes, she would quietly move her fingers in the air, imitating the maestro's hand movements, pretending she was pressing invisible keys. Her mother would smile when she saw her doing it, but also worry. Maria knew how strict the maestro was. He hated anyone touching his piano without permission. If he ever caught Elena near it, she could lose her job. But Elena's curiosity was stronger than fear. One evening, when Maria was finishing her work in another part of the mansion, Elena saw her chance. The piano room was empty. The lights were dim, and the air smelled faintly of polish and fresh roses from the garden. She walked quietly across the marble floor, her small footsteps echoing softly. She stood before the piano. It was taller than she was. She could see her reflection in its shiny black surface. Her hands trembled slightly, but her heart beat with excitement. Slowly, she lifted the cover of the keys and pressed one single note. The sound was soft but deep, filling the empty room with magic. It was like the piano was alive, responding to her touch. Elena smiled. She pressed another key, and then another, forming a small tune she remembered from one of the maestro's performances. The sound wasn't perfect, her timing was off, and she had no idea what the right notes were. But it felt right. Felt like the piano was speaking back to her. She didn't know that the night guard, Roberto, was standing outside the room, listening. He didn't stop her. In fact, every night after that, he would quietly unlock the door for her and watch from the hallway, amazed by her courage. Sometimes he would whisper, "Play, little one. The piano likes you." As the weeks went by, Elena became bolder. Every evening, after everyone left, she would sneak into the piano room. She learned the rhythm of the keys just by listening to the echoes in her mind. She didn't have lessons or books, but she had something more powerful: passion. She began to create her own small melodies, soft and innocent, filled with emotion. Maria eventually found out. One night, when she returned to the piano room to grab her cleaning tools, she saw Elena sitting at the piano, lost in the music. For a moment, Maria froze. Her first reaction was fear that someone would see, fear that the maestro would fire her. But when she heard her daughters playing, she forgot everything. The notes were clumsy but beautiful. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Elena," she whispered, walking toward her. "You shouldn't be here, my love." Elena turned and looked at her mother with hopeful eyes. "Mama, just one more song. Please, I want to play it for you." Maria sighed, her heart torn between love and worry. "If the maestro finds out, he'll be angry," she said softly. "I'll be careful," Elena promised. "But Mama, when I play, I feel happy. I feel like Papa is still listening to me." Those words broke Maria's heart. She sat beside her daughter and listened. The melody that came from the piano was simple, but it carried something no training could give: emotion. Each note sounded like a whisper from a child's heart. When the song ended, Maria held Elena tightly. "You have something special, my little one," she said, tears in her eyes. But promise me you'll be careful. Elena nodded. I promise. The next day, when Maria was cleaning the living room, she heard two servants whispering. Did you hear the piano playing last night? One said. I thought the maestro was home, but it was the maid's daughter. The guard told me she plays like an angel. Maria froze. Panic filled her chest. Rumors spread fast in the mansion. If the maestro found out, she could lose everything. Her job, their home, their safety. She went to Roberto that evening and begged him not to tell anyone else. He nodded kindly. Don't worry, he said. I see something in her, something rare. Maybe she was born to play. But secrets never stay hidden for long. One afternoon, as the maestro practiced with his students, Elena watched from the doorway. Her eyes followed his fingers as they moved across the keys. He noticed her standing there and frowned but didn't say anything. She looked at him not with fear, but admiration. After he left, she quietly entered the room and sat where he had sat just moments before. She placed her small hands on the same keys he had touched and imagined she was part of that world. The world of music, light, and applause. She didn't know it, but in that moment, her life was already changing. Her secret was about to be discovered, and the same piano that filled her with dreams would soon test her courage in ways she could never imagine. Elena didn't see the future. She only saw beauty in sound. Every note she played was like a piece of her heart coming alive. What started as a hidden dream was slowly turning into something much bigger. Something that would soon reach the ears of the very man who believed music only belonged to the elite. And when that moment came, the world of the great Maestro Lorenzo de Luca would never be the same again. It was a quiet morning in the mansion. The golden rays of the sun were slowly creeping through the tall windows, lighting up the marble floors and sparkling chandeliers. Maestro Lorenzo de Luca was in an unusually good mood. He had a big concert coming up, and he wanted to rehearse early before his students arrived. He believed no one could disturb him at that hour, but destiny had other plans. As he walked down the long hallway toward the music room, he heard something unusual. The faint sound of piano notes floated through the air, soft but emotional, filled with innocence. At first, he thought it might be one of his students practicing earlier than expected. But as he got closer, he realized something strange. The melody wasn't perfect, yet it was beautiful in a way that technical perfection could never be. It had heart. It had soul. He pushed open the door slowly and froze. There, sitting on his grand piano, was Elena, the maid's daughter. Her small fingers moved carefully across the keys, her face glowing with concentration and pure joy. Her feet barely reached the pedals, yet she was playing like she belonged there. For a moment, the maestro stood silently, listening. Something about her tune stirred him. It reminded him of his younger self, when he played not for fame or money, but for love of music. But then his pride spoke louder than his heart. What do you think you're doing? His deep voice thundered across the hall. The sound startled Elena so much that her fingers froze in midair. The note she was playing hung in the air and then faded away. She turned around quickly, her eyes wide with fear. Maestro, I'm sorry, she stammered, sliding off the piano stool. I didn't mean to. He cut her off sharply. Didn't mean to what? Touch my piano? This isn't a toy for children. Who gave you permission to come in here? By that time, Maria came rushing in, her cleaning cloth still in her hand. When she saw the scene, her face turned pale. Sir, please, forgive her, she begged. She's just a child. She meant no harm. I'll make sure it never happens again. Lorenzo crossed his arms, glaring at both of them. A child? She was sitting at my grand piano. The one I bought from Vienna. Worth more than you'll ever make in your lifetime. Do you understand the damage she could have caused? Maria lowered her head, tears welling up. I understand, sir. I'm so sorry. Please don't take away my job. We'll leave the room immediately. But before she could take Elena's hand, the little girl looked up at the maestro and said something that made everyone freeze. Sir, she said softly, music doesn't care who plays it. The maestro blinked, surprised. What did you say? Music doesn't care who plays it, she repeated, her small voice trembling but firm. It only wants to be heard. The room fell silent. Even Maria looked at her daughter in shock, afraid she had just made things worse. But Elena's eyes didn't drop. She stood her ground, even though she was scared. For a second, Lorenzo almost smiled, but his pride wouldn't allow it. He gave a small laugh, the kind that wasn't kind at all. "Oh? So the maid's daughter thinks she understands music better than me?" he said mockingly. "Tell me, little one, do you even know what those black and white keys are called?" Elena shook her head slowly. "No, sir, but I can feel them." Her words made him raise an eyebrow. He was used to being praised by trained musicians, not challenged by a child. "Feel them?" he repeated, half amused, half annoyed. "You think music is about feeling? Music is about skill, years of training, and discipline. You can't just walk in and feel a masterpiece." Maria pulled Elena close, whispering urgently, "Don't say anything more, please." But Elena, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "Then maybe that's why your music sounds sad." The maestro's expression changed instantly. For the first time, someone had dared to say something like that to him. His students worshipped him. His audiences adored him. No one, especially a maid's daughter, had ever told him his music lacked something. He didn't know whether to be angry or impressed. After a long pause, he said coldly, "If you believe music is about feeling, then prove it." Maria gasped, "Sir, please, she's just a child." But Lorenzo ignored her. "Tomorrow morning, in front of my students and servants, you will play something for me. If you can move me even slightly, I'll believe you have some talent. But if you fail," he smiled cruelly, "you will never touch my piano again." Elena swallowed hard. She didn't fully understand the challenge, but she nodded. "I'll play," she said softly. Maria's heart sank. "No, Elena, don't do this. He's testing you." But Elena looked up at her mother with steady eyes. "Mama, I'm not scared." The maestro turned and walked away, his coat swaying behind him. Before leaving, he said over his shoulder, "Let's see if music really doesn't care who plays it." After he left, Maria held Elena tightly. "My child," she whispered, "why did you agree? You can't beat him. He's the greatest pianist in the city." Elena smiled faintly. "I don't want to beat him, Mama. I just want to play." That night, while the mansion slept, Elena sat near the window of their small servant's room, humming softly to herself. She didn't have a piano to practice on, only her memory and imagination. Her fingers moved in the air, pretending to touch the keys. Maria watched her from the bed, her heart heavy with both fear and pride. She knew her daughter was walking into something impossible. Yet deep inside, a small part of her believed that maybe, just maybe, Elena's heart would do what skill could not, touch the soul of even the proudest maestro. And far away in his study, Maestro Lorenzo couldn't sleep. He kept hearing that one sentence echoing in his mind. Music doesn't care who plays it. He didn't know why, but those words had struck something deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The air was heavy, filled with whispers and curiosity. Every servant in the house already knew about what had happened the day before. How the great Maestro Lorenzo de Luca had caught the maid's daughter playing his piano and challenged her to perform in front of everyone. Some thought it was a joke. Others pitied the little girl who had dared to stand up to the maestro's pride. Maria could barely sleep that night. Her mind was full of fear. She knew her daughter had talent, but she also knew how harsh the maestro could be. To him, music was not a game. It was sacred. If Elena failed to impress him, there would be consequences. The thought of losing her job, her home, and her daughter's dreams all at once made her heart ache. When morning came, Maria begged Elena to forget about the challenge. "He was only testing you, my love," she said softly while brushing Elena's hair. "You don't need to prove anything to him. We can move on. Let it go." But Elena shook her head gently. "Mama, he said I could play for him. I have to." Her voice was calm, but her eyes shone with determination. I don't want him to think I'm afraid. Maria sighed deeply. She could see the same strength in her daughter's face that her late husband once had, that quiet fire that refused to be put out. You have a brave heart, she whispered, kissing Elena's forehead. But promise me you'll be careful. Later that day, Maestro Lorenzo entered the music hall with his usual confidence. His students were already gathered, tuning their instruments, whispering among themselves about the strange performance that was about to take place. When he walked in, silence fell. Everyone respected and feared him. He carried himself like a man born to command attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a slight smirk, today we'll have a little entertainment. It seems we have a new performer in our midst. His tone was laced with sarcasm. The maid's daughter believes that music belongs to everyone. So, let's see if she can prove it. The students exchanged surprised glances. Some smiled mockingly, expecting a funny show. Others looked uncomfortable, not sure if this was right. At the back of the hall, Maria stood with her hands clasped tightly, praying under her breath. She wanted to run and hide her daughter, but she couldn't stop what was coming. Elena walked slowly toward the piano. Her steps were small, but her heart was steady. She had never stood before so many people in her life. The big black piano looked even more enormous now, almost frightening. But she reminded herself that this piano had once spoken to her. It had been her secret friend in the quiet nights. Maestro Lorenzo leaned against a table, crossing his arms. Well, child, he said, show us what this feeling of yours sounds like. Let's see if emotion can beat years of training. Elena looked up at him and nodded. I'll try. She sat on the piano stool, her legs barely touching the ground. Her hands hovered above the keys, shaking a little. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The room was so quiet that everyone could hear the ticking of the old wall clock. Then softly she began to play. At first, her fingers stumbled. She didn't have the training to play fast or complex pieces. But as she continued, something began to change. Her notes became smoother, her rhythm more confident. She wasn't just pressing keys. She was telling a story. Each sound carried emotion. Hope, love, sadness, and longing. All blended together like colors on a canvas. The melody was simple, yet it filled the hall like a warm light. The servants stopped working outside the room. The students forgot to breathe. Even the maestro's smirk faded slowly. He didn't expect her to play that way, with heart, not skill. As Elena played, memories stirred inside him. He remembered his own childhood, when he used to play the piano for his mother in a small room, long before fame had hardened him. He remembered when music was joy, not a competition. For a moment, his proud heart softened, but he quickly straightened up, hiding his emotion. Enough, he said suddenly, raising his hand. Elena stopped, startled. The sound of the last note lingered in the air before fading into silence. Lorenzo walked up to her slowly, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. He stood beside her and looked down. You played differently, he said in a low voice. Not good, not perfect, but different. Elena looked up at him, not sure what he meant. Was it bad, sir? She asked quietly. He chuckled coldly. Let's just say it was interesting. But talent isn't proven with children's tunes. He turned to the audience. If you want to show real ability, you must play something worthy of attention. Tomorrow you'll play my piece, the Storm Sonata. Everyone gasped. The Storm Sonata was one of his most complex compositions. Even his best students struggled to play it correctly. It was filled with rapid notes, emotional shifts, and deep technique. Maria's face turned pale. Sir, that's impossible, she cried. She's just a child. She doesn't even read music. The maestro smiled coldly. Then she'll have to learn by ear. You said music doesn't care who plays it. Didn't you, little one? Elena hesitated. Fear flickered in her eyes, but only for a moment. I'll try, she whispered. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. Try? No, you'll do it. Tomorrow at the same time. If you fail, you'll never touch my piano again, and your mother can find another job. The servants murmured in shock. The maestro turned and left the hall, his coat swirling behind him, leaving everyone in silence. Maria rushed to her daughter and hugged her tightly. "Elena, why did you agree?" she sobbed. "That piece is too hard, even for his students." Elena buried her face in her mother's arms. "Because he doesn't believe me, Mama. I want to show him that music can live in anyone, even us." That night, while the world outside slept, Elena sat beside the small window of their servant's room, whispering the melody she remembered. Her mother watched her silently, torn between pride and fear. The challenge had been set. 1 week, one impossible song, one little girl with nothing but her heart to guide her. And somewhere deep inside the maestro's heart, though he didn't admit it, a strange feeling began to grow. He wanted to see what that child would do next. The mansion was quiet again that night, but inside a small servant's room, a little girl sat awake with her hands moving in the air, as if she was playing invisible keys. Elena couldn't stop thinking about the maestro's words. The Storm Sonata. It was the hardest piece he had ever written. A storm of music, fast, emotional, and full of difficult notes. Even his best students struggled with it. And now she had only a week to learn it. Maria sat beside her daughter, worry written all over her face. "Elena, you don't have to do this," she whispered. "He only wants to humiliate us. You heard him. Even his students can't play that song." Elena looked at her mother and smiled softly. "Mama, he doesn't believe that I can play. I want to show him that music is not about being rich or famous. It's about feeling. You always say that Papa used to tell me stories about never giving up, right?" Maria nodded, tears filling her eyes. Her husband had been a kind man who once played a small guitar for Elena when she was a baby. He used to say, "Music doesn't need a teacher. It just needs a heart that listens." And now their daughter was proving his words true. The next few days were the hardest of Elena's life. She didn't have a real piano to practice on. The maestro had forbidden her from touching his again until the performance. So she practiced on an old, broken keyboard that her mother found discarded near the market. Some of the keys didn't even work, and others made strange sounds. But Elena didn't complain. She sat for hours, listening to the faint memories of the maestro's song. She had only heard the Storm Sonata once, when the maestro performed it for his guests during a grand dinner. But she remembered the feeling it gave her, powerful, wild, and full of emotions. So she began to hum it, note by note, trying to rebuild it in her mind. Sometimes, when Maria finished her chores, she would sit beside her daughter and hum along softly. The sound of their voices filled the tiny room with warmth. Roberto, the kind old night guard, often stopped by and listened from the door. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Little one," he said one night, "you play with your heart, even when you have no piano. That's something no maestro can teach." Elena smiled shyly. "I just want the song to sound right," she said. "It has to sound like a storm, but also like hope." Days turned into nights and nights into early mornings. Elena practiced quietly so no one would hear her. Her small fingers moved across the broken keys again and again. Even though her hands were sore and her eyes heavy with sleep, she didn't stop. She could hear the melody growing clearer in her head, stronger each day. Maria worried constantly. "You'll make yourself sick, my love," she whispered one night as Elena rubbed her tired eyes. "He's not worth it." But Elena shook her head. "It's not for him, Mama. It's for the music. I want to make it proud." There was something pure in those words, something that made Maria's heart both ache and swell. She didn't understand how her little girl had found such strength, but she believed in her. On the 4th night, rain began to fall outside. Thunder echoed in the distance, and wind rattled the old windows. Elena looked out and smiled. "The storm is singing with me tonight," she said softly. She sat at the keyboard and began to play, matching her notes with the rhythm of the rain. Every lightning flash lit up her face, and every thunderclap made her music more powerful. It was as if the universe itself was helping her practice the Storm Sonata. By the 5th day, even some of the mansion's workers had begun to whisper about her. "Have you heard? The maid's daughter is actually trying to play the Maestro's song," said one. "She's just a child, what can she do?" another replied. But Roberto defended her proudly. "That girl has more music in her heart than all of them combined," he said. Meanwhile, the Maestro pretended not to care. Yet deep down he was curious. He had expected her to quit by now, to cry or give up. But every night, as he passed through the halls, he heard faint humming coming from the servants' quarters, the same melody he had written years ago. It made him pause. The girl wasn't just trying. She was feeling the music exactly the way he once did. Still, his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "She won't make it," he told himself. "Music is not a game for dreamers." But something inside him, a tiny spark, wanted to be proven wrong. By the sixth night, Elena's small hands were sore and red. Her fingers hurt with every press of a key, but she refused to stop. Maria begged her to rest, but she only smiled weakly. "Mama, one more time. Just one more time." Maria covered her mouth, trying not to cry. "My brave little girl," she whispered. Finally, on the seventh day, the night before the performance, Elena sat quietly by the window watching the moon. Her body was tired, but her spirit was alive. She closed her eyes and played the entire piece in her imagination. From the first thunderous note to the last soft whisper. She could hear it perfectly in her mind now. When she finished, she looked at her mother and said softly, "I'm ready." Maria hugged her tightly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You've already made me proud, my love, no matter what happens tomorrow." Elena smiled, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I'll show him that music can live anywhere, even in a maid's daughter." That night, as the mansion slept, the wind outside whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest sound of a broken keyboard playing a masterpiece. And though no one knew it yet, the coming day would change everything. For Elena, for her mother, and for the Maestro who once believed that music belonged only to the privileged. Because the storm she had been preparing for all week was about to begin. The morning of the performance came quietly, with a golden sunrise spreading across the grand city. Inside the Maestro's mansion, there was excitement and gossip in the air. Servants moved quickly, cleaning rooms and setting up the large hall where the Maestro's students were going to perform that day. It was a special event, an open rehearsal for some of the richest families in town. Everyone knew it was not just about music. It was about showing power, talent, and pride. Elena woke up before anyone else. Her hands trembled slightly as she washed her face in a small bowl of cold water. The room was still dark, but her heart was full of light. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Today, I'll let the music speak for me." Maria helped her comb her hair neatly and gave her the cleanest dress they had. A simple white one that she had kept safe for special occasions. It wasn't fancy like the other students' clothes, but Maria had washed it carefully, and it looked bright and fresh. "You look like an angel," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mama, do you think he'll let me play?" Elena asked. Maria smiled sadly. "He said you could try, didn't he? Just do your best. No matter what happens, promise me you'll keep your head high." Elena nodded, holding her mother's hands tightly. "I promise." By mid-morning, the large hall was filled with people. Wealthy guests, music critics, and other famous musicians. The Maestro's students sat proudly, each dressed in elegant clothes, their polished instruments shining in the light. They whispered among themselves, some laughing when they saw Elena standing near the corner, clutching her small notebook. "Is she really going to play?" one of them said mockingly. "With those tiny hands? She doesn't even have a real piano to practice on," another added. Elena heard their words, but she didn't let them hurt her. She looked toward the piano, the same grand instrument she had touched once before, and felt a strange calmness inside. That piano wasn't her enemy. It was her friend, waiting for her to tell its story. The Maestro entered the room, dressed in a sharp black suit, his expression serious and proud. The guests stood and clapped. He gave a small bow and looked around the hall. When his eyes fell on Elena, he paused for a moment. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe doubt. But then he looked away. Today, he said loudly, my students will perform pieces that represent skill, discipline, and emotion, the true heart of music. One by one, his students performed. Each played perfectly, but something was missing. They were skilled, but their music sounded empty, mechanical. The audience clapped politely, but there was no real feeling. The maestro smiled proudly after each performance, but deep inside, he could sense it too. Something wasn't touching their hearts. Then came the moment no one expected. Roberto, the old guard who had always believed in Elena, stepped forward from the back of the hall and said loudly, "Sir, you promised the little one a chance." The hall went silent. Everyone turned to look at him. The maestro frowned, a bit annoyed, but he remembered his own words from days ago. "Very well," he said slowly. "Let her come forward." Elena stepped out from the corner. The room buzzed with whispers. Some guests even laughed quietly, thinking it was a joke. Maria stood near the door, her hands pressed together, silently praying. Elena walked up to the piano, her small shoes echoing on the marble floor. She took a deep breath, sat down, and looked at the maestro. "Sir," she said softly, "may I play your Storm Sonata?" The maestro's eyes widened. "You remember that piece?" "I listened," she said simply, "and I practiced. In my heart." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, but the maestro raised his hand for silence. Something about her calm voice made him curious. "Very well," he said quietly. "Let's hear it." Elena placed her fingers gently on the keys. For a moment she didn't move. The hall was so quiet that even the ticking of the large clock could be heard. Then slowly she began to play. At first the notes were soft, uncertain, but then they grew stronger, smoother, and more alive. The melody rose like wind before a storm, swirling around the room. Her small hands moved quickly, gracefully, finding every note with a natural rhythm that no one had taught her. The audience leaned forward. The laughter disappeared. The sound of the piano filled the hall with something raw and powerful. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of heart. It sounded like rain falling, like thunder rolling, like hope fighting against fear. Maria stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She could hardly believe that the music filling the air was coming from her little girl. The maestro, too, couldn't look away. His eyes followed every movement of her hands. She was playing his song, his masterpiece, but she was playing it differently. She gave it soul. Where he had once written it with pride, she played it with emotion. It felt like she understood something he had forgotten long ago. By the time Elena reached the final part, the room was silent. Every note she played carried the story of her hard work, her mother's love, and her belief that music was for everyone. When the last note faded, Elena sat still for a moment, her hands trembling. Then she looked up at the maestro. No one clapped at first. They were too stunned to react. The silence was heavy, not of doubt, but of awe. And then, slowly, the maestro began to clap. It wasn't polite applause. It was real, heartfelt, and proud. The audience followed, filling the hall with thunderous applause that echoed like the storm itself. Maria covered her mouth and cried. Roberto smiled proudly from the back. The maestro walked toward Elena, his eyes shining. "You played with your soul," he said quietly. "You reminded me what music truly means." Elena smiled shyly. "I just played what I felt." He nodded, humbled. "And that's something no teacher can teach." That day, a maid's daughter taught a maestro the meaning of music. Not perfection, but passion. And from that moment, the hall that once echoed with pride now echoed with heart. The applause seemed endless. The grand hall echoed with the sound of clapping hands and astonished voices. Elena sat still at the piano, her small fingers trembling over the keys. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming. Just minutes ago, people had laughed at her. Now, those same people stood up to cheer. Some even had tears in their eyes. Maria stood near the door, her eyes filled with tears of pride and disbelief. She had always known her daughter was special, but seeing the entire hall, filled with the richest, most powerful people in the city, rise to honor her little girl was something she could never have imagined. The maestro stepped closer to Elena, his tall figure casting a shadow across the shining piano. The same man who had once laughed at her now looked at her with respect. "Elena," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "you didn't just play my song. You gave it a new soul." Elena looked up, unsure what to say. Her heart was still racing. "I just played what I felt inside," she whispered. The maestro smiled gently. "That is what true music is." The audience began to call out her name. "Bravo! Bravo!" shouted one of the guests. A woman in a red gown wiped her eyes and said to her husband, "She plays like she was born for it." Soon, people surrounded the piano, eager to speak to the little girl who had captured their hearts. Reporters from the local newspapers came forward, asking the maestro questions. "Who is she?" "Your new student." The maestro hesitated for a moment, then placed a proud hand on Elena's shoulder. "She is not my student," he said. "She is my teacher today." Gasps filled the room. No one could believe that the famous maestro, known for his pride and perfection, had said such words about a maid's daughter. But his eyes showed only honesty and humility. Maria covered her mouth in shock. Her heart felt like it would burst. After the event, when most guests had left, the maestro invited Maria and Elena to his study. The walls were lined with books and gold-framed pictures of him standing beside kings, presidents, and world-famous musicians. But in that moment, none of those things mattered to him. All he could see was the little girl who had reminded him what it meant to truly love music. He turned to Elena and said, "Tell me, child, how did you learn this piece without notes, without guidance, without even a piano to practice on?" Elena looked down shyly. "I listened to it once. Then I kept hearing it in my heart. Every night I imagined the sound of the keys. I practiced on an old broken keyboard Mama found. Some keys didn't even work, but I tried to remember the sounds." The maestro stared at her, speechless. He had spent years teaching talented students, but none of them had ever shown such dedication. "You have a gift," he said finally. "A rare gift that only comes once in a generation." He walked over to Maria, who still stood quietly near the door, unsure whether she was allowed to be there. "Madam," he said respectfully, "you have raised an extraordinary daughter." Maria lowered her eyes humbly. "Thank you, sir. She just loves music. That's all." The maestro shook his head. "No, it's much more than love. It's destiny." He turned back to Elena. "Would you allow me to teach you properly? I will take care of everything. Her lessons, her books, her future." Maria's eyes widened. "You mean, you want her to study with you?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Not as a servant's daughter, but as a musician. The world needs to hear her play." For a moment, Maria couldn't speak. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," the maestro said gently. "For her." Maria looked at Elena, who was watching them both with hope in her eyes. "Do you want this, my love?" Elena nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mama. I want to learn. I want to play on real pianos and write my own music someday." Maria hugged her tightly, unable to hold back her emotions. "Then yes," she said softly, "if it's what she wants." The maestro smiled warmly. "Good. From today, she will no longer be just the maid's daughter. She will be Elena, the pianist." The next few weeks changed everything. The maestro kept his promise. He arranged for Elena to have daily lessons, not only in music but in reading and writing as well. He gave her a small piano of her own, a gift she could hardly believe was real. The first time she touched its perfect keys, she cried softly. Word of her talent spread quickly. Newspapers published stories about the little girl who silenced the maestro. People from different cities sent invitations, wanting to hear her play. For the first time, Maria and Elena were treated with kindness and respect in the mansion. But what made Elena happiest wasn't the attention or the praise. It was the music. Every day she learned something new. New notes, new feelings, new ways to make people feel through sound. The maestro was patient and kind now. Sometimes, when she played, He would close his eyes and listen, smiling faintly, as if remembering the young musician he once used to be. One afternoon, he said to her, "Elena, do you know why your music touched everyone's hearts?" She thought for a moment and shook her head. "Because you played with honesty," he said softly. "You didn't play to impress. You played to express. That's something many professionals forget." Elena smiled. "Mama says music is like talking to God. You don't need words." The maestro looked at her and nodded, deeply moved. "Your mother is a wise woman." As the days passed, Elena's life filled with light. She still helped her mother with small chores. But now, instead of cleaning floors, she filled the mansion with music. Her laughter echoed through the halls that once seemed cold. The maestro students began to respect her, and even some of them asked her for advice on how to play with feeling. The mansion had changed too. It was no longer a place of pride and silence. It had become a place of learning, warmth, and hope. But most of all, the maestro himself had changed. The man who once believed that greatness came only from fame or skill had learned something far deeper from a little girl. That true greatness comes from the heart. And every time Elena played the Storm Sonata, he no longer heard his own creation. He heard hers, a version full of life, love, and the strength of a humble heart that dared to dream. The maid's daughter was no longer invisible. She was a rising star, and her music was just beginning to change the world. Years passed, and the sound of Elena's piano became known far beyond the maestro's mansion. What had started as a single brave performance by a maid's daughter had now turned into a story that touched thousands of hearts. The little girl who once practiced on a broken keyboard was now growing into a young woman whose music could make people cry, smile, and believe in miracles again. The maestro had kept his promise. He trained her with care, not as a servant but as a true musician. He often said to his students, "You can learn technique but not soul." Elena was born with music in her heart. Those words made Elena blush every time, but they were true. She played not from memory, but from emotion. Each time she sat at the piano, she told a story through her fingers. Sometimes of hope, sometimes of loss, but always full of truth. Maria watched her daughter with pride every single day. She still worked in the mansion, though the maestro often told her she no longer needed to. But Maria refused to leave. "This house gave my daughter her wings," she said. "I'll stay and keep it warm." As Elena's talent grew, invitations began arriving from all over the country. Music schools wanted her to study with them. Wealthy families wanted her to perform at their events. Even orchestras wanted to collaborate. The maestro chose carefully, protecting her from people who only saw fame and money. "You must never forget where you came from," he told her one evening. "Your strength is your heart. Guard it well." One day, years later, the maestro received a special invitation. It was from the National Music Conservatory, the same prestigious place where he had once been rejected as a young man for not being refined enough. Now they were inviting him to perform with his most brilliant student, Elena. He smiled quietly when he read the letter and called Elena into his study. "It's time," he said softly. "You are ready to play for the world." Elena looked at the letter in disbelief. "The National Conservatory? But maestro, that's where the greatest musicians perform." He nodded. "And that's why you belong there." The day of the concert arrived. The grand hall was packed with people. Critics, scholars, and admirers from all over the world. The chandeliers sparkled above them, and the grand piano stood at the center of the stage like a jewel. Maria sat in the front row, dressed simply but beautifully, holding her hands tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded with excitement and pride. Backstage, Elena took a deep breath. She could hear the low hum of the audience. The maestro stood beside her, older now, his hair white but his eyes bright with pride. "Do you remember what you told me the day you first played the Storm Sonata?" he asked. Elena smiled softly. "I said I just played what I felt." He nodded. "Then do that again tonight. Play what you feel. Don't play for applause. Play for your heart." When her name was announced, the audience clapped politely. Many didn't know what to expect from this young woman they had only read about in newspapers. But the moment Elena stepped on stage, something about her calmness and grace captured everyone's attention. She sat down at the piano, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. Her fingers moved like water, smooth, flowing, alive. The melody filled the hall, weaving between silence and sound. It was the Storm Sonata, but not as anyone had ever heard it before. This time, it wasn't just a song of struggle. It was a song of triumph. It carried the weight of her journey. The laughter, the pain, the long nights, the love of her mother, and the lessons of her maestro. Every note seemed to tell a story. When the music rose, it felt like the storm of her past, the rejection, the doubt. When it softened, it felt like Maria's gentle voice encouraging her through the hardest times. And when it reached its final part, it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, hope shining after the storm. Tears rolled down Maria's cheeks as she listened. Even the maestro, who had heard the piece 1,000 times, found his eyes wet. Around them, the entire hall sat silent, unable to move, afraid to break the magic. When Elena finished, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then the audience erupted in applause, louder than thunder. People stood, clapping and cheering, some crying openly. They shouted her name again and again. The maestro walked to the stage, his steps slow but proud. He bowed to the audience and then turned to Elena. "My child," he said softly into the microphone. "Tonight, the student has surpassed the teacher." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She took his hand and bowed with him, and the crowd cheered even louder. After the concert, reporters surrounded her. "How did you learn to play like that?" they asked. She smiled humbly. "My mother taught me to listen to my heart. The maestro taught me to trust it." That night, as they drove home, the maestro looked out the window and said quietly, "You have done what few ever do, Elena. You reminded the world that true music comes from humility and love. Never lose that." Elena looked at him lovingly. "I couldn't have done it without you, maestro. You believed in me when no one else did." He smiled faintly. "No, child. You taught me to believe again." A few months later, the maestro fell ill. Age and years of hard work had finally caught up with him. Elena visited him every day, sitting by his bed and playing softly so he could hear the music he loved until his last days. One afternoon, as she played a soft melody, he whispered, "Promise me, Elena. Keep teaching others what you've learned. Let no child ever believe that talent belongs only to the rich." She held his hand tightly. "I promise," she said through tears. When he passed away, the world mourned a great maestro, but his greatest legacy lived on through her. Years later, Elena opened a small music school named the Heart's Song Academy. She taught children from all backgrounds, rich, poor, orphaned, and lost, just as she once had been. And in one corner of her classroom stood an old, broken keyboard, the one she had practiced on when she had nothing. Whenever a student felt like giving up, Elena would smile and say, "You don't need a perfect piano. You just need a heart that listens." And as the sound of young hands learning to play filled the air, it was clear that the music, and the maestro's lessons, would live on forever. Because once, a maid's daughter dared to dream, and that dream changed the world.